What's up, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is JP here. We got a lot of Detroit basketball to talk about today, so you got the hat. Talk about represented.
What's up? This is the JP show. We do our thing, right?
Yep. We talk a lot about basketball, past and present. If you got a suggestion for us to talk about, let us know in the comments, please.
Yeah, thanks. So you mentioned we're talking about Detroit basketball, so let's get into it. What's our topic for today here?
So, you and I both know that, and we are both huge fans of the Detroit Pistons.
That's right.
Despite them not really being relevant for the past 10 years, they
Oh man,
they still have a lot of great history and many great teams. So I want to talk about that.
no
So
doubt.
so in the 80s and late 80s and early 90s, they had the Pistons back-to-back championships, led by Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars, along with Dennis Rodman, Mark Aguirre, Bill Laimbeer. They won back-to-back championships and made the finals 3 times.
Right.
And then there's Pistons in the 2000s, led by Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, Tayshaun Prince. That team won a championship in 2004, made the conference finals six straight years, and made the finals twice.
Mm-hmm.
So today I want to compare the two teams and see which team is better.
Oh, so which team is better between the Bad Boys and the Goin to Work Pistons?
Yep.
Okay. Now, JP, are we considering like multiple years, like the Pistons of the '80s versus the Pistons of the 2000s? Or are we talking about like specifically the '89 Pistons or the '90 Pistons versus the 2004 Pistons? What do you think?
I don't think we should be specific because both teams have accomplished a lot together. So I want to put all of that into discussion.
Okay. All right. So we're trying to discuss this. Are we picking sides here? What do you think? Because if we're picking sides, I already know who I think is better.
I don't want to pick sides, and I already know which one is better, but I love the 2004 team.
You love the '04 team, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
How about we state our reasons for why I like the 2004 team and why you like the 89 and 90 team.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, let's do that. Which one do you want to start with?
First off, let's talk about the players on both teams.
Okay.
I talked about them in a bit. I mentioned them in the beginning, but
Yeah.
I want to break them down.
Let's break it down like position by position.
Yeah.
So let's just go from 1 through 5. So let's start at the 1. You got Isaiah Thomas in '89 versus Chauncey Billups.
Mr. Big Shot.
Mr. Big Shot. Okay. All right. I love the Pistons. I love both of these teams here.
So do I.
That being said, I think Isaiah is the number 2 point guard of all time behind Magic Johnson.
He's number 3 to me.
Number 3 behind, don't say it. Don't say
Magic and Curry. They play the same position, yet Steph and Isaiah play the same position, yet one of them has 2 MVPs and 4 rings.
Let's not even bring Curry into the argument now, because that'll be a whole nother show. So anyways, regardless, at the 1, Isaiah is going to be better than Chauncey Billups, right?
I'm not going to argue with that. Isaiah Thomas is far superior compared to Chauncey Billups.
Yeah, Isaiah Thomas he was definitely one of the best players in the league. We'll just say this, one of the best point guards of all time,
Yes.
One of the best leaders of all time. He was the heart of that team. Chauncey was the heart of the 04 team, or was Big Ben the heart of that team? I don't know.
I think Chauncey Billups was the leader of the team, yet I want to say all of them were kind of the heart of the team. Like like everybody played their role. None of them had huge egos,
Yeah.
and everybody pretty much had their role and exceeded that role better than anybody else.
Okay. Okay. So let's say that let's say I still say compare the two. Let's say Isaiah's going to be over Chauncey.
Yeah.
So then in two guard, you got Joe Dumars versus Rip Hamilton.
So so Dumars was an all-star
Mm-hmm.
and a first-team All-NBA defender, a Finals MVP, and the second best player on those two championships.
Yep.
Rip was a three-time All-Star, a one-time champion, but he never made any All-NBA teams, never made
Mm-hmm.
any All-Defensive teams, and and I think we both know that Joe Dumars is a better player.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's closer here than it
It's
was at the point guard.
closer,
Closer, but I
but
still
not.
got
It's still not close,
right. I
honestly.
still got Joe above, especially on the defensive side. I got Joe ahead. Okay. So that's the two. So then at the three is where it gets, so the Pistons, it depends on the year. We're talking about the Pistons in the 80s and the Bad Boys, because you got Rodman that played the three, a lot in 90. But then if you're talking about in 89, that's where you got Mark Aguirre, who was in there a lot. I mean, even in 90, Mark Aguirre is kind of so it just depends. It flexes a little bit more versus the 014 team where Tayshaun was the clear uh, small forward. So, I mean, we could just lump it together. The small forward position on the Bad
I was
Boys team. Go ahead.
I would say Mark Aguirre and Tayshaun Prince because Rodman could play the three and the four.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mark Aguirre was maybe a forward kind of guy.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. So Tayshaun Prince versus Mark Aguirre.
All right.
What you think?
So on the defensive end, I'm definitely going with Tayshaun Prince. Uh, he could also shoot the ball a bit while also being the anchor of the defense along with Ben Wallace. So I think
Yeah. Tayshaun was, as far as the perimeter guarding on the perimeter, he used to be the guy that would take whoever the best perimeter player was and really lock them down. So yeah, you got to give him that.
yeah,
Um, Aguirre was a better scorer though.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
he definitely was a strong scorer. um, between the two. So what do you think between those two? Who would you pick one or?
I say Tayshaun because I think he's more versatile.
Okay. We'll I'm not going to argue that because the '04 Pistons are losing so far, so I'm not going to argue that. Well, okay, so let's take Tayshaun for that team. Okay, so at the four position, so here's where you got Rashid from the '04 team, and then who are you putting at the four from the '89 team or the '90 team? Would it be? I mean, is this where you're going to slide in Rodman? Because Rodman came off the bench a lot in '89. Or are you going to slide in Jimmy Edwards or Bill Laimbeer? That's why I was saying, like, sometimes Rodman played a three with Edwards and Laimbeer on the court at the same time. But, like, that team was so deep. I mean, they got to
The
rotate it. I'd have to look at the stats. You probably know the stats. Who started the most between the group? Laimbeer definitely started at center.
yeah. So
So,
so I wanted to compare Rodman and Ben Wallace and then compare Rashid and Bill and Beer because of their play styles. Even though they play slightly different positions, I wanted to kind of lean more into that.
okay. So let's do that. Keep it simple, and then we'll compare everybody else as far as the bench. So you want to compare Rodman with Laimbeer. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you
I mean,
definitely?
Rashid
I'm
and
sorry.
Lambeer.
My
So
That's my bad.
I made a mistake too.
No, so she and Lambier, and then you want to compare Ben and Rodman.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with Big Ben and Dennis Rodman because I know those two are a couple of your favorite players of all time.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear what you think about Rodman versus Big Ben.
Big Ben is my favorite player in NBA history. He's a top
Okay.
five. He's a top five rim protector of all time.
Mm-hmm.
The one of the best rebounders in NBA history, and one of the scariest dudes in NBA history.
How many times did he win Defensive Player of the Year?
4 times.
4 times. Yep. Yep.
And
Rodman. So looking at Rodman, how many times did Rodman win Defensive Player of the Year?
twice.
Twice. Okay.
But what
Who?
separates Rodman from Ben is Rodman's longevity.
Okay.
Even in his last season, he was still averaging more than 14 rebounds a game.
Yeah.
And he made more all defensive teams for more teams.
Mm-hmm. The thing about it is, a lot of that longevity you're talking about and the stuff he did for other teams really shouldn't come into the argument here because we're talking about the Pistons. So like if you compare his years on the Pistons versus Big Ben's years on the Pistons,
then it would be Ben Wallace though.
you take Ben Wallace. Now,
yeah.
I agree on taking Ben Wallace. Again, just comparing the Pistons years, not comparing Robin Williams with the Spurs or the Bulls. But the other thing is, we talked about this earlier, Big Ben was the heart of that 04 team.
Yeah. Well,
and
Robin maybe came off the bench.
Right, but Big Ben was a leader. He was a great leader for that team. So because of that, and because we're just considering Pistons, I'm going to give it to Big Ben.
Yeah, I agree with that. If we're talking about just the Pistons specifically, not their whole career.
Not the whole career. So then we're basically 2-2 now. That leaves up the last kind of position. I know we mixed the positions up, but you're comparing Sheed versus Lambier. So what do you think here?
I wanted to bring up Rasheed's years in Portland, but since we're only talking about the Pistons, I couldn't even do that.
Can't do that. Yeah, we're talking about the Pistons. So
Rasheed was an all-star in 06, and the Pistons didn't win a championship before he got there. And when Rasheed got there, even though it doesn't show up in the numbers, he still elevated the team far more than Bill Lambier could have. So I think Rasheed had a better impact on the 04 team than Bill Lambier had on the 89-90 team.
maybe.
But we can't use hypotheticals here because it wouldn't truly happen.
Right.
So
I think the thing is,
you
kind of brought up intangibles with Rasheed Wallace. The thing is, I think there's a lot of intangibles with Bill Lambier because when you think about Bad Boys, Bill Lambier, Bill Lambier, John Sal, like Rick Mahorn, like Bill Lambier was the bad boy. Like, so if I'm looking at that, like that squad, he was kind of the defensive heart of that squad and took on that whole person. So I think it's almost a toss-up if you're comparing the two and their impact on their teams there.
Weren't you talking to me a few weeks ago about Rasheed Wallace's defense and rebounding?
Yeah, I was talking about some of those intangibles with Rasheed and the fact that some of it doesn't show up in the stats. But I think Lambier is similar, so it's hard for me to pick one. I literally don't know. I'm not making an argument. Like, I think it's a toss up. I don't know. What do you think? You think it's Sheed over Lambier?
That's what I think.
Okay. Well, not to linger on it too long, we'll take that and say, so let's just say that you'll give the 04 team 3-2 on the starters. But here's the thing. We left off some players from that 89-90 team that started a lot that we get to the bench. If we get to the bench, I'm going to just say this. The bench on that team is definitely better than the bench on the 04. Because the bench, we didn't talk about Jimmy Edwards. We didn't talk about John Sally. We didn't talk about Rick Mahorn. I mean, like, you got all of that on those teams in 89-90. And then the bench on The bench on the '04 team at that point, you're talking about Lindsey Hunter. Who else is on that team coming off the bench besides Darko?
Yeah, we don't talk about it.
Antonio McDyess, we didn't talk about him. He wasn't on the championship team, but he was there later. Yeah.
Well, there are guys like Chucky Acton was on that team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mike James.
I didn't even bring up Vinnie Johnson on the 89-90 team. I'm telling you, the Pistons bench in 89. We don't even need to discuss it. They got the bench. Yeah. And then, so here's so two more things I think we should talk about before we close out. Who's the better coach between Chuck Daly and Larry Brown? And let's just keep it. I know Larry Brown ended up leaving, and you had other coaches you could put in there in the 2000s, but let's just keep it to Daly versus Larry Brown. And then just general intangibles on the team that, as far as how the teams played together. So who's the better coach, Chuck Daly or Larry Brown?
Are you talking about entire careers?
With the Pistons.
Because Larry Brown wasn't even there for that long.
Right,
so
but they won the chip, though. So we're really talking about that build up and win the chip. So what do you think?
In 2004, the Pistons won 54 games.
Okay. Do you just know that just off the top of your head, or did you look that up?
I knew it. I was just looking it up to double check I knew what I was talking about.
Okay.
But in 2005, they also had 54 games.
Okay.
And I know we can't really talk about this as we're talking about the Pistons, but before and after, he made bad teams better. Like if you look at if you look at the Charlotte Bobcats, when Larry Brown got there, he made him the best defensive team in the NBA. Or they had the #1 defensive rating.
Okay.
But in 2004, that was one of the few times where Larry Brown was on a great team and then turned them into a championship team. So that shows the impact that Larry Brown had on defense and the impact that he had on the team.
So bottom line, you're doing a lot of talking over here. Who's better, Chuck Daly or Larry Brown?
Larry Brown. That's what I'm arguing about.
Okay.
That's why I'm doing all this talking.
So
I'm just talking about Larry Brown.
You're taking Larry Brown. Okay. I don't know. Chuck Daly versus Larry Brown. I think so. This gets into our next area here, where we talk about how the team played together and and that side of it, and bringing the team together. In my opinion, the Pistons in the '90s late '80s, the Bad Boys were a more talented overall team, especially if you look at Isaiah Thomas and how talented he was. To that point, I think Larry Brown accomplished what he did with less than what Chuck Daly had, and that's a credit to how good of a coach Larry Brown is. So I'll take Larry Brown. Again, just looking at the years of the Pistons, not looking at the fallout afterwards, but I'll go out. I'll agree with you and take Larry Brown. So last point is intangibles. Any intangibles that are there between the two teams that you think?
Can you remind me what intangibles are?
So intangibles, the stuff that doesn't show up on the stats, the stuff that doesn't show up on the rosters. How did they play together? What did they have to overcome? Like, what was their competition in the league in the '80s versus the league in the 2000s? What do you think?
I'll just say it right here that the '89 Pistons had tougher competition than the 2000s.
And I would agree, because you got the Bulls for Jordan. I mean, you got the Celtics for Larry Bird. You got the Lakers.
The 76ers.
Yeah, I mean.
I may be talking about East teams, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and then if you compare the East specifically in the 2000s was weak. So
Yeah,
coming out the East, I
pretty
mean, you got
weak.
the Nets that were
The
strong.
Nets were dropping off at that point by 84 and
Right.
85. The Pacers were good.
The Pacers were really good.
The Heat and
Yeah.
Cavs were a piece away, or a few
Yeah.
years away.
Exactly.
It was a,
Exactly.
but we could talk about the East. But what about in the finals? Who came out of the West?
Right. So here's the thing. A lot of people are going to talk about the '04 Pistons going up against the Lakers, and they had Shaq and Kobe and Karl Malone and Gary Payton. But
I'll,
that team, the Lakers were in the middle of imploding there. Go ahead.
I don't want people to look at the '04 team as if it was a fluke.
I agree there.
It was
It
not.
definitely, it clearly wasn't a fluke because you saw the success that they had, even though they didn't win a chip. They saw the success they had outdoors, so it clearly wasn't a fluke. They went to what, like 6 straight conference finals, something like that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it clearly wasn't a fluke, even though the East was weak. But all I'm saying is that that Lakers team sounds a whole lot better than it really was. They weren't, even though they added Malone and Peyton, they weren't as good as they were when they won those earlier chips with Kobe, Shaq and Kobe.
Wait, what? What?
I'm saying, I'm saying the '04 Lakers, even though they added Karl Malone and Gary Payton, they still weren't as good as they were earlier in the 2000s, like 2000, 2001, 2002, when they were just
Oh,
dominating the league, because Shaq and Kobe's chemistry had been hurt by that time, and they weren't. And Karl Malone and Peyton were at the end of their career, so it sounds a lot better. That team sounds a lot better on paper than it really was.
that's that's what I that's what I was saying.
Okay.
The pit, the pit, the Pistons beat the Lakers, not just on the stat sheet,
Yep.
not fit just physically,
Yep.
but they outplayed them mentally. They
Yep.
had better chemistry. They output the Pistons outplayed the Lakers in every game.
Yeah.
And
I
all
remember at the
5 games
time.
that they played.
At the time, we called it a 5-game sweep, the first 5-game sweep, because
E-
it felt like that.
because even the game the Lakers won, they were still outplayed.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
So, JP, we've gone long on this episode talking about this, so we
So
should probably
let's get
wrap
to
it
the
all up.
point. Let's get to the point here.
Yep.
So based on this discussion, who who do you think is the better? Which do you think is the better team?
89.
Based on this discussion, I'm saying the '04 team, but there are too many factors that we didn't talk about that heavily point to the '89 team. So
True.
so so I'm gonna agree with you there.
Yeah. If you look at some things on paper, you look at those teams and seeing them, I'm going 89. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So, yeah, we're going long on this episode, but we're going to get another one up next week here. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into the JP Show, and we'll see you next time. All right.